I'm thankful to be here with Becky Robinson, who has been first an acquaintance online and then a friend and an advisor for me. I'm thankful to spend some time with her. We're going to talk some about her new book, Reach, which is fantastic, and I recommend it, not just for people who are interested in marketing, but people who are interested in influence and extending their influence. And I also want to talk with Becky about being a woman who has started her own business and a growing business and now has people on the payroll, and she signs the checks and all of that other kind of stuff that relates to this. So Becky, thank you so much for taking time to be with me
Well,
today.
thank you, Dan. I'm really grateful to be here with you.
So you are the CEO and founder of Weaving Influence. And it happens that you're also a woman. I'm curious about your observations on the journey of being a woman who has started her own business.
Well, I'd be happy to share that with you, Dan. And I want to tell you first that I never really, as a younger person, had a vision of starting my own business. And in fact, if you had asked me at about age 22, I really didn't even have a vision of having an important career. I was really at that age more interested and focused on family and also ministry. At the time, my husband was a pastor. And my mom, I think, got a little bit frustrated with me, Dan, because I wasn't ambitious. I was smart. I did really well in college and high school, grad school, all that stuff. But in terms of having big career ambitions, I just didn't. And so I kind of came to this entrepreneurship journey and this business owner journey in an unexpected way. And the way I got here, Dan, is, after having stepped out of the workforce to raise my 3 young kids, my husband said to me one day, okay, Becky, when the kids are in school, all of them, because at that time I was homeschooling my kids, what are you going to do for work? And what I relied upon at that time was the fact that I had always loved writing. And, my undergrad degree is in creative writing. And so back in about 2009, I started doing some freelance writing, which actually is where my journey and yours converged, because I was writing a leadership blog, and Dan, you reached out to me and wanted to talk a little bit about that. At any rate, that kind of freelance writing and blogger journey led me eventually to help launch a book with a leadership consultant. And then from there, it led me to getting some inquiries about me doing this kind of work for others. So it wasn't that I had this business idea or this business plan. It was more that doors of opportunity were open to me. And then I really began to love the work that I was doing. And as a result, what I found out early on was that it wasn't work that I could do alone. Marketing books really requires a team approach. And it was pretty obvious from the first client I was serving that if I was going to continue to serve clients well and provide what they needed, I would have to build a company that was bigger than me. And so that's what I did. And so, Dan, you asked me about, being a woman. I don't necessarily know, apart from the fact that all along the journey, I've been juggling these priorities of motherhood and, being a wife and managing my household. On one hand, that's a challenge as an entrepreneur. And I'll remember early on, Dan, I had a client, I won't name him, but I was talking to him a little bit about the ambition that I eventually found and my desire to grow the company. And he said to me, well, because you're a woman, you will never have an investable business. And that kind of made me mad. It's like, well, first of all, at the time, I wasn't sure I ever wanted investors. I still, I share the ownership of my company with my husband today. But, in the beginning, I was curious about investors, but I didn't necessarily want them. But when he said I couldn't be investable, then I wanted to prove him wrong. His thinking was, as a wife and mother, I was never going to work enough hours to attract an investor. And as it turns out, I'm very happy to own the company outright and not have other people involved, to be able to chart the path of growth for my team and myself, without those other concerns. But I thought that was like a really interesting moment. I think also one of the benefits I've had, or, one of the ways that this has been made easier for me, is that I have had the financial support of a partner, so that, in the early years of the business, I didn't necessarily take money out of the business. I could do Weaving Influence back in 2012 or 2013, and I didn't really have a paycheck to speak of. And, there aren't a lot of people that have that safety net. So whether it's because I'm a woman, I don't know, but, and I think sometimes to be an entrepreneur, it's easier, if you don't have that requirement to make money for yourself immediately. And that's what allowed me to grow my company in those early years.
Wow. I love this. I didn't really have an ambition. I was not, I'm sure you did well. Like you said, you did well in school. That means, you know what it means to do hard work and to pay attention and have some discipline. It's not like those qualities were lacking in you, but you didn't have ambition. You said, really, you're where you are today because you just seized the next opportunity. When you give advice to people about starting businesses, I mean, how does this play into that? Do you have an aspiration to start a business, or just go out and see? I relate to it because Leadership Freak came into existence just one step at a time, and just doing the next thing, and you know what I mean? So
yeah. Well, I mean, I think that for people who have ambition, there's certainly a lot of value in having a plan. But what I always try to remind people, and you and I share a friend in Whitney Johnson, one of the things that Whitney Johnson says about these things is, if it's scary and you're lonely, then you're on the right track. And Whitney also talks a lot about these journeys having a discovery-driven process. And, I think for anyone who aspires to entrepreneurship or is on a journey, the thing that you think you're going to end up doing isn't always the thing that you end up doing. And so you really need to be open to, what the market needs, what your customers need, what works, what doesn't work. Back in, I'd say maybe 2011, Dan, I thought my path was going to be writing ebooks about how to use social media marketing and selling them. And so I wrote these early ebooks, and I even tried to sell them as products. And I quickly discovered I didn't have an audience to sell them to. So rather than making that the focus, I started to give those ebook products that I had created, I started to give them away for free. And that was a way that I could share value and eventually then become known for the expertise that I was creating. So, 2011, I thought, hey, I'm going to sell ebooks, and I could, picture that money adding up. Well, I never made a dime on those ebooks, but I did, get to practice writing. I did get to practice sharing valuable ideas with others. And then it was another important introduction when Jessie Lynn Stoner introduced me to Whitney Johnson when her first book came out, that I kind of figured out what the path for Weaving Influence would be. And that was really just by discovering that step by step, seeing what she needed.
What I'd love you to think about and reflect with me on is the steps. I don't like the word steps. It doesn't really work. But you said, for example, you wrote these ebooks and then you gave them away. You started adding value. And there's this journey that you are on and have been on where you said, well, I want to do this, but then, well, you know what? I'm going to give that away because, I just need to start adding value and building my audience. There came a point when you hired an employee. There came a point when you got your first client. Talk to me about the steps, and what I want to do is create a post out of what you're going to say. So try to help me here.
I will try my best. I know how to write a blog post. So I think that step one, and I'm going to tie this into my book, because in my book, I talk about what I call the influence gap. And it's a gap that occurs when we show up in real life differently than we show up online. And most of the time, what I've seen is that people have this real world expertise, but they're not effectively leveraging that in online spaces. So if we go back to 2009, I was what I call in the book a beginner, or a beginning beginner. I didn't necessarily have any real world expertise at that moment, nor did I have an online presence. And so back when I first began and when I first started blogging, and I believe I started the Weaving Influence blog in 2010, I was just figuring things out, Dan. I was writing and I had writing skills, but I didn't necessarily have any expertise that was of value to anyone. And the way that I moved away from that beginner state and developed expertise was actually just by doing it. So step one is like recognize if you're a beginner that that's where you are, and that it may take some time for you to develop not only that real world expertise to add value to others, but also it will take time to build that online presence. So step one, admit that you're a beginner. Okay. For your post, Dan. Okay. You know, I think step two is build real relationships without any expectation of return. And I think that what worked well for me on my journey to entrepreneurship is in those early years, as I was networking and hustling and, you know, reaching out to bloggers to get guest post opportunities and trying to grow an audience. I wasn't really necessarily asking for anything except relationship and connection. You know, maybe I was asking a little bit like for help to get exposure for the blog, but I wasn't asking anyone to buy anything. I wasn't asking anyone to hire me. You know, I wasn't even asking anyone to like recommend me or refer business to me. It was really just all about like content and relationship and value. So step one, admit you're a beginner. Step two, build real relationships. You know, I think that step three would be to clarify the value that you have to offer as you discover it. So when I started to take on clients, the value that I had to offer was some social media strategy related to book marketing. And the more I could clarify that, the more likely I would be to attract customers who would want to pay me money to do that on their behalf.
Okay, so love this. A couple of things I took from this, you know, I'm figuring things out as I go allows you to recognize that you're a beginner. The place of not feeling like you don't need to know everything is freeing. If you feel like you have to know everything, it's like that perfectionism that freezes us up. And then you said, you know, build real relationships. And don't, you know, it's not about getting something for yourself. It's not about the ask. It's without an expectation. And then clarify the value that you are actually delivering. Mm-hmm. The idea of building real relationships, it's taken me so long to realize that. But what I was doing was simply being curious and loving talking to authors about their work. I didn't really realize, and now I'm desirable to them. But back in the early days, and I began about when you did, back in the early days, I just did it because I was fascinated and curious, and I thought, gee, this is fantastic. I get to talk to so-and-so, and I didn't know that. And now it's like they feel the same way. I get to talk to Dan not because I'm a great person, but I have a platform. Anyway, today.
Can I say something about that? I'm sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no, go for it.
I want to tell you, Dan, that first conversation that we had was unforgettable to me. I still remember the day that we first talked, and here's why. I was in that kind of humble state of being a beginner, but you treated me, Dan, as if I had value to add to you. And you asked me questions as if I could teach and mentor and coach and help you. That put so much esteem on me, and I didn't really feel like I deserved it. And so that is absolutely unforgettable to me, Dan. I was so impressed by you.
That's such a great statement, you know, that you can ask a question that makes someone else feel valuable. I hadn't really thought of it that way. And I'm glad you felt that way. Honestly, I admire almost everyone I talk with, and I hope they feel that. So that is so fantastic. I'm going to confess something. So I'm having one interview, and this person is just not for me and not for Leadership Freak, and just nothing. I actually sent an email to the publicist while this person is talking on, and I said, I'm not going to be able to use anything out of this. I just want you to know. And she wrote back something nice, and I finished the interview and deleted it because it was not. But other than that, I have had such wonderful conversations with people that, and that curiosity, it took me a while to realize that what I really am bringing to clients, like when I work with clients today, is that it's a gift. when I say a gift, I don't mean, oh, you're awesome, Dan. I just mean I don't work on it. You know what I mean?
Well, you are awesome, Dan, if you needed to hear it.
Well, you're awesome too, and let's continue on now that we got the awesomeness out of the way. So you say, you know, recognize that you're a beginner,
Mm-hmm.
build real relationships where you're not necessarily asking for anything, clarify the value that you bring, and keep bringing that. What
Mm-hmm.
else comes to mind?
I would say, you know, another key step on that entrepreneurial journey is to look for opportunities, look to create opportunities for others. So if you have a desire to build a business, then you will need to involve others, likely, because it's not going to be a solo deal. And, you know, some of my favorite things about owning a business, well, they're not things, they're people. Um, and I'm not sure exactly how to work that into your point if this is becoming a blog post, but you know, I hired people in the beginning in really creative ways. You know, I hired a woman I met on Twitter by tweeting in the morning to say, good morning, who's awake? And Carrie answered, and we started a conversation. You know, I hired a woman local to me. Her name is Amy, and I hired her partly because I saw a post on Facebook where she mentioned that her final kid was going off to kindergarten and she had a schedule to clean her house 35 hours a week. And when I saw that Facebook post, I thought, oh no, that does not sound fun. And I asked her if she wanted a job. She's now our VP of operations.
Wow.
So this idea of like creatively creating opportunities for others and being open to possibilities. You know, I have a more structured approach to hiring today, Dan. But I also think that there's so many serendipitous moments that can happen. And I would not trade, you know, the many fabulous people that I've had the chance to work with along the journey.
Wow. Powerful.
You know, not all of them stick around, but, you know, it's all more on that path of building real relationships. And when we think about having impact as leaders, you know, can I have impact through my online presence? Sure. But the impact that's going to mean the most is the impact with those people I work with day in and day out. And you can never lose sight of that.
Wow. Wow. That's so powerful to me. So on your entrepreneurial journey, Becky, you know, you started off a nincompoop. You didn't know anything. And then you started realizing you did have some value. Love number 4, because you know, you don't think about hiring someone in such a way that you're helping them fulfill a need, you know, except for money maybe, but you know, so I love that, you know, create opportunity for others. We have to get out of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Next, what else comes to mind?
Yes. So I think a next step, and in a way, this is linear for me in terms of where I was as an entrepreneur, you know, choosing and fueling values for your organization. So for me, you know, I started to hire some people, and then it became really important to create the vision of where we're going. The vision has to be driven by the values. And Mark Miller is a client of mine. I know you would admire his work. And Mark really is the one who said, you know, you should create some core values for your organization. And those are the things that are going to inform the way you do business. You know, it's going to inform the people you hire because you want to get people who have the values that are aligned with you. It's going to inform the clients that you take on because you want to ensure the clients have that same set of values. So that was a really critical and pivotal point for me. And it came maybe about 2 years into my organization where I sat down and I brainstormed a list of values, and then I whittled them down. And, you know, to be honest, 10 years in, we need to revisit the values and bring some additional, you know, insight to them. Having lived with these same values for 8 years now, you know, it is time for us to look at them again, maybe add some. You know, there are a few things. Values are both like a descriptor of what already is, but they also can be aspirational. And so I think that in some ways our values right now are missing some things that we really do value, but we've never articulated that those are the values. One of those might be celebration. So, authors and clients that we work with say that we do a really good job of encouraging them to celebrate their progress in growing their online presence. It's not a stated core value, but I'd like it to be. Another one might be gratitude. We work really hard in my organization to express gratitude to each other, to others, and to use focusing on what's good to help us through difficult times. And so it's possible that we'll go back to add that as a core value as well.
Love that you added the concept of aspirational values. It's important to know the difference because, this is who we are. This is who we aspire to become. It's important. Don't think that who you aspire to become is who you are, because then you're going to be waylaid. But powerful.
Yes. Well, and one of the core values that I originally chose down was the core value of growth. And when I describe the core value of growth, I say, this is about growth as an organization, but it's also about growth as individuals. We care about helping the individuals in our organization to grow in their careers, to grow in their contribution, to grow personally, to grow professionally. But the core value of growth has really helped me to stay connected to that initial vision. And, something like COVID happens, right? And if we had been growing our revenue year over year, which, it hasn't been a straight line. There have been some bumps on the journey. But when we hit the pandemic in early 2020, it came at a really crazy time. I had a contract on a building and we were going to renovate a building to be the home of my local team. And then COVID hit and we, first our biggest client cut their retainer in half. And then for various reasons, we had to make a decision to end the contract. And it was not going to be possible to follow through on the vision to buy the building. And, we had a loss of revenue from 2019 to 2020. And from 2020 to 2021, we lost more. And we shifted staffing. And if not for that core value of growth that I had to keep coming back to, Becky, you said this was a value. You want to grow. You want to create more opportunities for others. Having that value helped me to return to the hope and vision that I had. So the values are really critical when you face hard times because they remind you of what's important and what matters.
Wonderful. Love that. Do you want to add anything else after values?
In terms of the steps?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's a good question, Dan. I obviously identifying values is not any type of end point. I think, once you've identified your values, you just have to go to work with them every day. Mm-hmm. And, along the way, I've used like different questions to kind of fuel my energy for the work, because of course it's tiring. And one of the questions I use is, who does God want to use my business to bless? Or, more recently, I've thought about who does God want to use my book to bless? Who does God want to use my life to bless? And I think the more I can just stay connected to what matters to me personally, the better leader I can be in my organization.
Mm-hmm. All of the 4 things in your book, value, consistency, longevity, and generosity, that are in the Reach book. I mean, you've been striving to live up to those ever since you began, I think.
Indeed, yes. So maybe the final point of the blog post, Dan, is, continue in your 4 commitments.
That makes a lot of sense. I love that little ribbon there, the little bow on this last, continue.
I know you like to do it, but I don't know how you can write this in 300 words.
Well, we're going to see, right? But
part 1, part 2, each one could be a post of its own.
It's true. It's true. It's the part of the journey is learning to leave stuff unsaid. When you wrote the book, I want to ask about your own experience of writing a book. Mm-hmm. What did you learn about yourself as you were writing this book? And
good question, Dan. One of the things I think I learned was kind of called out to me by Carrie, who's one of my first team members. And she looked at the first draft of the book and she said that I was missing. And something I say a lot is, you have to show up. And Carrie was really pushing me to show up more with my own stories in the book. So I learned that I'm more comfortable shining the light on others at times than I am at telling my own story. So
Very
that's one
awkward.
thing.
I hear you.
Yeah, that is one thing I learned. I do think the book is better for me having added more of my own journey to it in the final drafts. I think I learned, Dan, that I love doing this. Um, I'm 50 years old, and maybe that's late to start as an author. Maybe it's early to start as an author. I don't know. It feels like the right time for me. But what I learned was I love doing it, and I hope I get to do more.
Mhm.
Um,
Do you have thoughts about a follow-up work? Would it be continued, or would it be something totally separate? Am I premature in asking?
there's no harm in asking. I have two ideas for the second book, and I want to think about how I can start to explore some content so I can see which idea might be the most useful in the market. My favorite chapter to write in Reach was chapter 7, which is a chapter about content being a flexible asset and the way we can take the value that we have to offer and reshape it in various ways. And I'm not going to presume to think that you remember everything about my book. So I'll just reference at the end of the chapter, I threaded a story through chapter 7 of a woman named Jennifer Bangs. And one of the statements that I made is that Jennifer has done something really interesting in repurposing her content, in that she has repurposed her life.
Hmm.
And so one of the ideas I'm toying with for book 2 is to really think about the ways that we can repurpose our lives to add value for others. The mistakes we've made, the challenges we've faced. And I think many of the authors who I've met, and I talk to lots of authors all the time, Dan, just like you, many of them are doing their best work when they write books that include their personal journeys. So just yesterday, I met a woman. She shared with me the painful, painful story about losing her 19-year-old son to suicide. And in the aftermath of that, then losing her mother. And she's written a book to try to bring some hope to some hopeless situations. And that's a really good example of, someone repurposing their life in a way that makes a difference for others. There's another young couple who I met, and they recently published a book. I think it's called Unraveled. And again, a really difficult circumstance in their life. Their daughter unexpectedly died as a toddler. And, how they have learned as a couple to process that grief and help other couples who are experiencing that. So this idea of how do we repurpose our lives in ways that inspire hope in others is something I'm toying with. Or kind of a more practical book would be just more depth and detail on how do you repurpose the content that you're creating. But I'm thinking that would have a possibly smaller audience, whereas the story angle might be more interesting. So I'm not sure. Those are my two ideas, and you heard it here first.
Okay, I heard it here first. I'll be anxious to see how that all plays out. How are you different today as a result of writing Reach?
Wow, that's an excellent question. So I'm going to be vulnerable for a minute, Dan. I think anybody who writes a book experiences a lot of ups and downs of insecurity or imposter syndrome, or like wondering if their work is worthwhile. And even just a week after my book has come out, what I've seen is the community of folks who I've built real relationship with over the years has come out with such a strong show of support. And then people who I don't know, who don't have any reason to, give me praise or support or help promote my book, have also kind of joined in the throng. I feel like I have this choir around me that's like singing, like, thanks, like it mattered to them that I wrote the book. And so I think I'm more confident at this moment that I have value to offer, that it matters to people than I previously have been.
Wow. So I had a conversation with the fellow who heads up a high performance at West Point. And he has a book out that's been out for a few months. And I asked him a similar question. And he said, I didn't realize how important the things I was teaching really were, or really are. He said, and it's very similar to what you said. You started to get a sense, or today you have a sense that you might matter And you do, obviously. And I was recently in San Diego with an organization, and they were just so kind. And, after it was over, we're so glad you came. And I said, gee, you guys make me think like I could really do this. Thank you. And it's that, you have the voice in your head. Everybody I ever talked to has, right? It's like, if they knew the truth about you, you wouldn't be here.
Exactly, exactly that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and for the book Reach, which I think is again, not just a book about online building an audience and all that, but it's about influence and being a person of influence. And for me, I love that angle on the book, and it's definitely a great book to put on your shelf, and not to read and put on your shelf and give to others. So
thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate that.
All righty.